Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Greater Naples with our Christmas morning virtual service. We're grateful to have you with us on this Christmas morning or whenever you tuned in. I'm here today with our co-music directors, Abby and Sean Allison, and guitarist Dave Dusts. Thank you all for being here, and this is all being made possible, of course, by our tech guru, Dan Goodsit. So we all wish you a very, very Merry Christmas. We offer this service as a gift to you and yours. There will be no offering, there will be no announcements, except that I urge you to return back here to the sanctuary in person next Sunday, January 1st, as Skip Lundborg leads us in our New Year's morning service. Skip is always a treat to hear. But for now, however, join us for this service of story and music, and we begin with our morning prelude. Our opening words this morning come to us from the Unitarian Universalist religious educator, Sophia Lyon-Fahs. For so the children come, and so they have been coming always in the same way they come, born of the seed of humankind. No angels herald their beginnings, no prophets predict their future courses. No wise men see a star to show where to find the babe that will save humankind. Yet each night a child is born is a holy night. Parents sitting beside their children's cribs feel glory in the sight of new life beginning. They ask, where and when will this new life end, or will it ever end? Each night a child is born is a holy night, a time for singing, a time for wondering, a time for worshiping. As early as I can remember in our house growing up, we would set up a creche at Christmas time on the deep mantel over the fireplace in our living room. The set of detailed clay figures were about 3 inches high and were painted with rich and wonderful colors. There was a cow and some sheep and certainly some angels, Mary and Joseph, and, of course, the baby Jesus, who was placed in the hay on Christmas Day. Hay that one of my sisters once tried to convince me came from the original manger. With every passing year, I took on a little bit more of this duty, and when my sisters moved out, it was my chore altogether. And I would begin to elaborate on the nativity scene, utilizing rocks and sand and lichens and trees borrowed from my train set. It got to be quite an elaborate thing. Then there were my favorites, the three wise men, who, to me, even then, represented something a little bit different. Mysterious visitors, not quite a natural part of that natural setting. Sure, I knew the familiar carol. We just heard it, We Three Kings. I preferred the rubber cigar version at that point. But I understood that the three kings had followed a star to Bethlehem and finally to the Christ child to bestow their gifts. But I still wondered, who were these guys? And where'd they come from? I found out way too late that the Magi appeared only in the book of Matthew, which never refers to them as kings, never mentions their names or specifically how many Magi there were. Further, if you wanted to go there, a literal reading of Matthew would tell us that the Magi visited Jesus when he was a young child, not a babe, and that they came into the house and not into a manger. Obviously, these Magi have intrigued folks for a long time because somewhere around the 5th and 6th century, stories began springing up here and there about who they were and what they meant. One legend, unsupported by the Bible, of course, has given the Magi names, ages, and nationalities, all conveniently and neatly packaged with some deep symbolism. There's Melchior, the king of Arabia, an elderly, fair-skinned man with a white beard that gave the gift of gold. There's Gaspar, king of Tarsus, a young man bearing frankincense. And then there's Balthazar, king of Ethiopia, whose gift of frankincense represented Christ's divinity. Excuse me, let me go back and say that again. So there was Melchior and Gaspar and Balthazar, the king of Ethiopia. He was a middle-aged black man who brought the gift of myrrh. So the gift of gold, according to legend, was meant to represent the royalty that Jesus, the house of David and Jesus' lineage. The gift of frankincense would speak to his divinity, and the gift of myrrh to his healing abilities. The separation of their ages is explained in a popular story. Melchior, the elderly wise man, went first into the stable where Jesus was. There he found an old man with great wisdom. Balthazar went in next, and there he found a man of his own age, full of patience. And finally, when Gaspar entered alone, he encountered a young man full of energy and passion and inspiration. And so afterwards, they compared notes and decided that they would go in together, which is when they found the babe. I like this story because it speaks to what each of us brings to any encounter, namely ourselves and our expectations. If we could just but leave our expectations at the door and bringing just our real selves, how much better our living could be, how much better our gift giving might be if we brought our real selves to those encounters. William Sidney Porter, better known to readers as O. Henry, was born in 1862 in Greensboro, North Carolina. He was a literary pioneer for depicting the lives of lower-class and middle-class people in New York City. Schooled only to the age of 15, he managed to hold a variety of jobs in his life. He was a pharmacist, a ranch worker, a bank teller, a journalist, and a draftsman. He fled to Honduras after being indicted for embezzlement, but returned and spent 3 years in federal prison. And during his incarceration, he began to write adventure stories set in Texas and Central America. And they quickly became popular. In 1904, these were gathered into his first collection of short stories and published under the title Cabbages and Kings. After his release from prison in 1902, Porter went to New York City, his home from then on, and the setting of most of his fiction. Writing prodigiously under the pen name of O. Henry, he completed one story a week for the New Yorker World Sunday magazine, in addition to other stories that were published in other magazines. O. Henry's most representative collection, perhaps, was probably The 4 Million. The title and the stories were a response to the claim of socialite Ward McAllister that only 400 people in New York were really worth noticing. And of course, O. Henry did this by detailing events in the lives of everyday Manhattanites. He wrote at a different time, when gender stereotypes weren't questioned, so I hope you'll understand that this story, written in 1905, one of his most famous from the 4 Million, could be about any young couple of any gender starting out in the world. The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. $1.87. That was all. She had put it aside 1 cent and then another in her careful bargaining with the vegetable man or the butcher. Della counted it 3 times. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was nothing to do but to fall on the couch and cry, so Della did just that. Whilst Della grows steadily quieter, we can look at the home in which she lives. Furnished rooms at a cost of $8 a week. There's little more to say about it. In the hall below is a letterbox too small to hold a letter. There's an electric bell, but it doesn't make a sound. There was also a name beside the door, Mr. James Dillingham Young. When the name was placed there, Mr. James Dillingham Young was being paid $30 a week. Now he was being paid only $20 a week. The name seemed a bit too long and too important. Perhaps it should now read Mr. James D. Young. But when Mr. James Dillingham Young entered the furnished rooms, his name became very short indeed. Mrs. James Dillingham Young would put her arms warmly about him and call him Jim. You already met her. She's the one lying on the couch sobbing. Della. Della finished her crying and cleaned out the marks of it from her face. She stood by the window and looked out with no interest. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a gift. She had put aside as much as she could for months with this result. $20 a week is not much. Everything had cost more than she had expected. It always happened like that. Only $1.87 to buy a gift for Jim. Her Jim. She had had many happy hours planning something nice for him, something nearly good enough, something almost worth the honor of belonging to Jim. There was a looking glass between the windows of the rooms. Perhaps you've seen the kind of looking glass that would be found in an $8 furnished rooms. It was very narrow. A person could see only a little of herself at a time. However, if she was very thin and moved very quickly, she might be able to get a good view of herself. Della, being quite thin, had mastered this art. Suddenly, she turned from the window and stood before the mirror. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face had lost its color. Quickly, she undid her hair and let it fall to its complete length. Now, the James Dillingham Youngs were very proud of two things. One thing was Jim's gold watch. It had once belonged to his father, and long ago, it had belonged to his father's father. The other thing was Della's hair. If a queen had lived in a room next to theirs, Della would have washed and dried her hair where the queen could see it. Della knew her hair was more beautiful than any queen's jewels and gifts. If a king had lived in the same house with all his riches, Jim would have casually looked at his watch every time they met. Jim knew that no king had anything so valuable as the watch. So now Della's hair fell about her, shining like a falling stream of brown water. It reached below her knees. And then, just as quickly and a bit nervously, she began putting it up on her head again. At one point, she faltered for a moment and stood looking at her own reflection while a tear or two ran down her face. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliance still sparkling still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sofronie, hair articles of all kinds. Up to the second floor, Della ran and stopped to get her breath. Mrs. Sofronie, large and cold-eyed, looked at her. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Mrs. Sofronie. Take your hat off and let me look at it. Down fell the brown waterfall. $20, said Mrs. Sofronie. Take your hat off and let me look at it. Give me the $20 quick, said Della. Oh, and then the next 2 hours seemed to fly as she bounced from one shop to another to find a gift for Jim. She found it at last, feeling that it surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the shops, and she had looked in every shop in the city. It was a gold fob chain, simple and chaste in design. Its value was in its rich and pure beauty. because it was so plain and simple. You knew that it had to be valuable. All good things were like this. It was good enough for the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that Jim must have it. It being so like him, quietness and value. Jim and the chain both had quietness and value. She had paid $21 for it and then hurried home with the chain and 87 cents left over. With that chain on his watch, Jim could look at his watch and learn the time anywhere he might be. Though the watch was so fine, it had never had a fine chain. Without a chain, the watch wasn't quite complete, and Jim would sometimes take it out and look at it only when no one else could see him do it. When Della arrived home, her intoxication gave way to a little prudence and reason. She began to think more reasonably. She started to try to cover the sad marks of what she had done. Love and large-hearted giving, when added together, can leave deep marks. It's never easy to cover these marks, dear friends. Never easy. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't like me, she said to herself, before he looks at me a second time, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7, the Christmas Eve dinner was just about ready. Jim was never late. Della held the watch chain in her hand and sat near the door where he always entered. When she heard his step in the hall, her face lost color for a moment. She often said little prayers quietly about simple, everyday things, and now she said, please, God, make him think I'm still pretty. The door opened and Jim stepped in. He looked very thin, and he was not smiling. Poor fellow, he was only 22 and with a family to take care of. He needed a new coat and had nothing to cover his cold hands. He stopped just inside the door. He was as immovable as a setter at the scent of a quail. His eyes looked strangely at Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not understand, and it filled her with fear. It wasn't anger or surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply looked at her with that strange expression on her face. Della went to him. Jim, she cried, don't look at me that way. I've had my hair cut off and sold it. I couldn't live through Christmas without giving you a gift. My hair will grow again. You won't care, will you? My hair grows very fast. It's Christmas, Jim. Let's be happy. You know what a beautiful, nice gift I got for you. You cut your hair? Asked Jim laboriously, as if he had not arrived at a full understanding even at the hardest mental labor. Cut it off and sold it, said Della. Don't you like me now? I'm me, Jim. I'm the same without my hair. Jim looked round the room. You say your hair is gone? You don't have to look for it, she said. I sold it, I tell you. Sold and gone. It's the night before Christmas, Jim. Be good to me, because I sold it for you. Maybe now the hairs on my head can be counted, she said, but no one could ever count my love for you. Shall we eat dinner, Jim? Out of his trance, Jim quickly seemed to awake. He put his arms around his Della. But let's give them their privacy for a few seconds and look in another direction and ponder. $8 a week or $1 million a year, how different are they? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts to the child, but only the babe understood their relative value. From inside the coat, Jim took something tied in paper, putting it on the table. I want you to understand me, Dell, he said. Nothing like a haircut could ever make me love you any less. But if you'll open that, you may know what I felt when I came in. White fingers pulled off the paper, and then a cry of joy, and then a change to tears. For there lay the combs that Della had long worshipped in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs of pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful, vanished hair. She had known they cost too much for her to buy them. She had looked at them without the least hope of owning them. And now they were hers, but the tresses that should have been adorned by the coveted combs were gone. But she held them to her heart and at last was able to look up and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then she jumped up and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful gift. She held it out to him in her open hand. The gold seemed to shine softly as if with her own warm and loving spirit. "Isn't it dandy? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at your watch 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how they look together." Instead of obeying, Jimbo tumbled down on the couch and put his hands behind his head and smiled. "Dell," he said, "let's put our Christmas gifts away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use now. I sold the watch to get the money to buy the combs. And now I think we should have our dinner." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were doubtless wise ones. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two young and foolish people in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give gifts, these two were indeed the wisest. Oh, all who give gifts and receive gifts with the fullness of themselves are the wisest. Everywhere they are the wisest. They are the Magi. Not gold, nor myrrh, or even frankincense would I have for you this season, but simple gifts, the ones that are hardest to find, the ones that are perfect, even for those who have everything, if such there be. I would, if I could, have for you the gift of courage, the strength to face the gauntlets only you can name, and the firmness to know that you, yes, you, can be the bearer of quiet dignity that is the human glorified. I would, if by my intention I could make it happen, have for you the gift of connection, the sense of standing on the hinge of time, touching past and future, standing with certainty that you, yes, you, are the point where it all comes together. I would, if wishing could make it so, have for you the gift of community, a nucleus of love and challenge to convince you in your soul that you, yes, you, are a source of light in a world too long believing in the dark. Not gold nor myrrh or even frankincense would I have for you this season, but simple gifts, the ones that are hardest to find, the ones that are perfect, even for those who have everything, if such there be. The gifts that I would have for you on this day are but simple gifts, and they can be hard to find. Love, connection, community, and something else. The courage to give enough of yourself to make those simple gifts more meaningful. Go in peace, go in love. Merry Christmas.